ourselves out. We've opened up, be filled with the Lord, and I'm going to tell you this afternoon a great secret. Some of you have been in camp before, have heard me tell about this. I want to tell you of the first camp farthest out that was ever held. You'll find it described in the 6th chapter of the 2nd book of Kings. Now, it so happens that the divinity schools are doing a wonderful work. They're turning out the ministers, giving them wonderful training in the Bible. We can't cover that in a little week camp, just 1 week long. But we do have folks like the leaders you've had. They're taking everything they take from the Bible. So all the training necessary for the running of a great big organization like a modern church requires so much time. That's the one thing they don't teach in the divinity school is prayer and practicing the presence. That's the school of the priests, but in the school of the prophets, the only thing they teach is prayer and practicing the presence of God. That's why I say that this was the school of the prophets, as it was called, of which Elisha was the organizer, was the first camp farthest out. Elisha had more answers to prayer than anyone in the Old Testament. They weren't his great answers. He was not the great soul, but he was unique in his technique of prayer. But he never wrote a book. I've written 20 books. Why didn't he, a great prophet, write a book? You'll find in these first 7 verses of the 6th chapter of 2nd Kings, you'll find the secret code that reveals his whole method of prayer. And I want to bring that out. It's going to be the method we'll use in our prayer groups, the method we have used, and we found it marvelously effective. Well, just a little about the personality of this Elisha. He was just the opposite of Elijah. Elijah was lean, muscular, the motive type. He never asked anyone to do anything he could do himself. He dug the trenches of Elisha, who was fat and plump, would have sat on a log and had the other men dig it. Elijah picked up the boy and carried him up to the prophet's chamber, but Elisha was out reading the Reader's Digest under the tree, and the mother carried the boy up. She sent the servant out to bring in Elisha, and she knew just what he'd do. He'd give him the staff and say, "You can do it as well as I can." And sure enough, she met the servant coming in. And she went out and took Elisha by the ear and said, "You're just going to come in yourself." When Naaman, the great general, about as great as Eisenhower or MacArthur, came clear down from another land to see Elisha, he just sat in there by the corner of in his comfortable armchair, reading the Reader's Digest, and he just said to the man who came in, announced this, "You just tell Naaman to go and jump in the lake." That made Naaman very angry, very wroth. He said at least he could have come out and bowed down. But that was Elisha. We had a camp farthest out up here in, Corncroft, and it wasn't big enough. So they said, let's go down here to the valley, and we'll each chop down a tree, and we'll build a bigger one. That's exactly what happens with the camp. We had a camp farthest out in California at a school called Glendora. After 2 years, the young men said, "This is too small for us. Let us go to Whittier." We went to Whittier, and 2 years, Whittier College, and then 2 years, we'd outgrown that. We went to Pomona College. In 2 years, we'd outgrown that. Now we've gone to Redlands University, where there are 300 or 400 people gather every year. That's the same thing happened here. It begins with this statement. Then the young man in the school of the prophets, and in the camp farthest out, came to the leader and said, "This place is too small for us, too straight for us. Let us go, we prithee, down to the Jordan River, and we'll each cut down a tree, and we'll build a bigger camp farthest out." And Elisha said, "Go ye." And he sat down on a stump, and the young man said, "Won't you go with us?" And to the young man's surprise, to my surprise, to your surprise, even to Elisha's surprise, he said, I will go. He went down there, and the young man began to chop away, and all the other young men were chopping, and one of them cried out when he saw the axe head flying off into the Jordan. Alas, it was borrowed. If you ever heard George Hales get up to give a speech 5 years ago, you would know that the talk he gave this morning, one of the best talks on guidance I think I've ever heard in my life, it was borrowed. He borrowed it from the man upstairs. If there's any power I give in this talk, or that Genevieve gives, well, it'll not affect me. It'll not affect me, because all the power comes from above. We've done and fooled too much time with mere axe handles. I have gone to churches. I've gone to camps, and they talk all the time of the methods and this and that. I'm a Presbyterian elder, so I can go to the quadrennial meeting of the Presbyterians of America, when all the great souls of America and all the greatest ministers, and they select the most spiritual delegates, trustees, or elders. I've gone there, and they talk on methods, how to do this and how to do that. If they'd come in and have a quiet time in the morning before breakfast, they wouldn't have anyone speak but the ones who had got a vital experience of life. Let that be come to a place to just lift them, like you come here. If they, instead of using axe handles, they just used the things that were borrowed. Well, now comes the secret code by which prayers are always answered if you can follow this formula. Listen to it in just two little sentences. The 6th and the 7th verses in the 6th chapter of of 2 Kings. Where did you lose it? Said Elisha. Remember, that's what Jesus said when they brought the young man they couldn't heal because he had epilepsy. And he said, when did this first begin? The father said, as a boy. It used to throw him into the fire, sometimes into the water. All right, I want to know where it began. The psychiatrist used that. A great physician called Dr. Freud, I believe it was. A woman came to him and told him all her symptoms. He examined her, said, well, yes, these are incurable. I can't do anything. You don't come here again. I charge you $10, and sorry, I can't help you. The next week, she came again. He said, what are you coming here for? She said, I just want to talk about my troubles all the time, and my family have just refused to listen to me. You are so patient, and I'm perfectly willing to pay you $10 if you'll just let me talk to you for half an hour and tell you all these things. Said, all right, go ahead. And he took the $10 and went on working with other things. And the next week she came, and he didn't pay any attention to her the next week, but he was taking in the money. After a while, one day, he took a look at her, and by Jove, you're getting cured. And they made a discovery, a great discovery, that if you can let people pour it out, drain out these things from the subconscious and forget until they get back to the place where the thing began, they get cured. In 1929, I gave a series of addresses in Harry Emerson's Fosdick's church. A woman coming to all these meetings said, I have spent $10,000 under a psychiatrist. I've been here 2 years. I pay him $50 an hour. I see him 2 hours a week. You multiply $100 by 50 weeks, and I have to pay my board and room too, and I want you to pray. And I said, we're going to start a Camp Farthest Out. The first one will be next summer. You come there. She came. We drained this out. We asked the Lord to send in a vacuum cleaner and pull these things out, and she got released to this creative writing and painting and all this. Now, if you go to Gould Farm, the place where broken down people go to be healed, you'll find that she is the rock of ages there. She's the one that can hold them all steady. She's the stable one. That's where you begin now. Find where the thing began. My daughter, Helen May Olson, whose husband wrote First Steps in Prayer, wrote me, Dad, there's a dear woman in this city who has a married daughter in South Carolina who's not been able to hold any food for 4 years. She keeps alive by eating 10 meals a day. She holds a meal for about 2 minutes, and she's getting to be skin and bones. The doctors can't find anything the matter with her physically or mentally. And Mrs. Arnold wants to know if she pays her way, her daughter's way up to St. Paul, if you will pray for her. Well, I want to say right here that you all know that I don't ever heal anybody. Many people I pray for are healed, but it's borrowed. There's a power that simply flows through that does it. And I don't want anyone to gamble, come across the continent, just up there for, depending on Glenn Clark. Better just get on your knees right down there in South Carolina. Well, she doesn't know how. So I wrote back, well, I'm going to be in Atlanta a month from now in the First Methodist Church, and if she'll come over there, that won't cost a very long journey. She can stay alive that long. I'll pray for her there. On the front seat in that church there sat a very handsome young man, a very beautiful young lady. He was overweight because 10 meals a day was more than he needed. She was just almost like a skeleton, but a beautiful one, eyes deep sunk. I didn't have to be introduced. I just walked down there and said, "Is this Helen Carnes?" I said, "Sure is. Let's come in here in the side room and have a little prayer." I said, when did you lose your power? When did you lose your power of holding your food? Well, 10 years ago, when I married, I said I was afraid that if I got too fat, my husband would stop loving me. Now, our subconscious hears all those remarks. That's where the psychiatrists work. I don't bother much with the subconscious, but when you get a sticky problem, you just go right down the corridors of the past, find where it began. I said, there's where it began. Your subconscious is the most wonderful little servant anyone has. It'll always do anything that its master wants. We'll call it Junior. Little Junior said, I'll see that she doesn't get too fat. And little Junior's done a wonderful job. Are you afraid now that if you got too fat, your husband would stop loving me? I should say not. He stuck through me through thick and thin, especially thin. So I said, little Junior, did you hear that? We want to thank you for your fine job, but now we want you to use that wonderful skill of yours to see that she gets some fat. I said, now you come, now we'll have a prayer. I knew right away she was cured. Just where'd you lose it? Come into the hotel where I am, you two, and eat a big breakfast tomorrow. We're going to start something. Not quite a year after that, I was in Greenville, South Carolina, and the Methodist church where I was to speak, I found 1,200 people, and they were turning away 100 that they wouldn't hold. I said to the minister, do they turn out like this? Oh, I should say not. But he said, for the solid year, people have been meeting Helen Carnes on the street, and they say, what's happened to you? And she says, she's been telling them, you come to the First Methodist Church on January 14th, and you'll see what happened to me. Now she has been for a number of years the chairman of the council ring of the North Carolina camp, which has been so popular they've had to have 2 camps. They always have to have one, about 250, and then they have to have another one to take care of them. She's been the head of the spiritual life work down in that city. And her mother is so happy. My daughter wants some spare partner. She just calls up Mrs. Arnold. And Mrs. Arnold has come to the camps too, and she says it isn't only what's happened to Helen. She's gained those 35 pounds, which makes her just the shape of a Venus de Milo. I have to explain that. An old lady would ever want me to add 35 pounds by one prayer for them. Now, that's where it began. Next, now let's go on. That's just one, how much you can get out of one little sentence in the Bible. The next sentence, the seventh sentence, he took hold of a stick that fitted his hand perfectly, tossed it out where the thing was lost, and the axe head came floating up. Now, in a good many seminaries, they try to push that aside, say, of course, that's just a legend handed down, a superstition, because an axe head couldn't float. Ladies and gentlemen, I got on a building that is about 100 times longer than this, made of iron and steel, and it floated and took me across to Europe on the ocean. I got on another building longer than this, made of iron and steel, and it carried me like a magic carpet right up through the air, clear around the globe. But if those things can float through the water and through the air, I'm not going to question whether a little axe head can float on the water. That's merely a little matter of tiddlywinks, or not worth discussing. It's how it floated, and here's the how. He took hold of something that he could take hold of with a firm grip, with his understanding, with his grasp. He could grasp intellectually. Threw it out there where the need was, and up it came. Let me just illustrate. A woman came to me. She said she had a goiter and a tumor. She was so frail that the doctor said that an operation would be fatal. I had made this discovery. That all of Jesus' parables were means by which he could make them take hold of something. They were handles. They take something they could take hold of and grasp with their intelligence. Let me just illustrate this before I come back to this woman. A Roman captain came. The Roman captain came and he said, "My bond slave is dying and I want you to pray for him." Well, have you read any verse in the Bible, in Scripture, that you can take hold of? You know, that's the thing. You get hold of some verse you can just take hold of. And then many miracles have happened when a man of God takes hold of something, he believes in that. Then he applies it over here, things happen. Oh, my trouble is I don't know your Scriptures. Well, I wish I did. And one of the Pharisees spoke up and said, "Well, you must do all you can for this man, because see the spires of yonder synagogue? He paid for that with his own money. He's going to try to, when he retires from the Roman army, he says he's going to study the Scriptures. But we don't have them for sale. We don't have a Gutenberg press and way of distributing them unless he comes to the synagogue and hears it read." Well, what can you take hold of? Well, he said, the only thing I can take hold of is things in my experience. My only experience has been in war. And can you take something out of the profession of war and use in the profession of good? Well, what can you take hold of? There's one thing that I believe in. I don't believe in, I know it. Any command given with authority in the Roman army is instantly obeyed. How do you know? Why, I have men over me, but I also have men under me. When I say to one, go, he goeth. When I say to one, come, he cometh. Otherwise his head would be taken off. Now, I've heard it said that you speak differently than the scribes and Pharisees, and that you speak as one having authority. Now, I can take hold of that. And if you speak with authority, you won't need to even come to my house. You can stand where you are and give the word. Give the word of command, and my servant will be instantly healed. And Jesus said, I haven't seen such faith, no, not in Israel. He'd say that of you, he'd say it of me, if we would take hold of the handle of things that we can take hold of and apply it. And so only 2 times he praised the thing as wonderful, was praising the faith of 2 foreigners, not for Israelites. One was that half-breed, half-Syrian, half-Phoenician woman, and one was this Roman captain. And the servant was healed. I just had one chance to speak in Rome. We just spent a day there. After sightseeing, they gathered a church full of folks, and I rose to speak, and I said, the highest compliment that Jesus ever gave to any mortal man was given to a Roman captain. I didn't know there was a Roman captain sitting right out there. I didn't know what I was saying was about, as I was going to take hold of them almost like as effectively as Paul's statement on Mars Hill that I found an altar to the unknown God. And what you ignorantly worship, I've come to declare unto you. I said, I'm going to tell you about that Roman captain. I was pointing right, that Roman captain didn't know it. I told how he took hold of something, and it gave him the faith. Well, this woman had this goiter and a tumor. I knew that Jesus talked in parables, and so I put my answer into a parable. The kingdom of heaven, I said, is likened unto a woman who had a little Ford car and a little Ford garage, and she's very happy till the Mrs. Jones next door got a Cadillac and put it in her big Cadillac garage. Now, Mrs. Smith didn't need a Cadillac, but she wanted to keep up with the Joneses, and she kept wanting one, and if you want a thing hard enough, you'll get it. So after a while, she got the Cadillac, put it in her garage. It was too big, it stuck out, and where it sticks out, we'll call that a growth. Can you think of anything that you desired very much that wasn't in the divine plan for you to have? She said yes, years ago, and I tried to forget it. Now, if you try to forget a thing, it'll fall back into your interior somewhere, the poison of it will, the festering of it, and it'll cause something else. If you have an infected tooth and you don't want it pulled because you're afraid it'll hurt, and you forget it, it'll manifest in rheumatism in your left knee. So I said, will you tell me what it was? She told me. Are you willing to relinquish it now? She said she was. All right, I opened the window, let's throw it out. Here's a little booklet I've written called The Lord's Prayer. You'll find in there a chapter called The Divine Plan. You shake this up every morning like you'd shake up a bottle of medicine, and you drink that divine plan right down. You read that word for word every morning for the next 3 weeks and get contented with your plan and not be looking out to see what others are receiving. And I'll pray for you. At the end of 3 weeks, she wrote, the doctor took an x-ray and he told me that my goiter and my tumor are both vanishing away and I won't need an operation. That led me to writing a book called How to Find Health Through Prayer, in which I went back to the psychological causes of all these different diseases. Some of those critics scoffed at it, but in a few years, all the magazines were filled with a new discovery written up by new doctors called psychosemantics, in which they ascribed the same causes. Cancer, if you have resentment. Asthma, if you have self-pity, or if you're tied to your mother's apron string. I was in Birmingham, Alabama, and Mrs. Coles, one, if not the most spiritual woman there, she said there's a friend wants to come and see you, and I said, all right, and the friend came in and said that she had a growth on her breast. And I said, is anyone you have any grudge against, any resentment? No, she couldn't think of anyone. But she said, I'd like to have you pray for my daughter, too. She has asthma so that I don't dare let her out of my sight. She's now 12 years old, and she's begging to let her go to a Girl Scout camp. And I'm afraid to let her. And I said, well, now, tied to the mother's apron string is what does it. If you'd let her go, she'd get cured a whole lot faster. And if I prayed for it, she'd be safe. Oh, she didn't feel she could do it. She thanked me after we prayed for all these things. And as she went, I said to Mrs. Coles, I almost wish she had some resentment. If I get something or a hold of something, we might go somewhere. Pretty soon the doorbell rang, and here she was again. She said, can I see you privately? And I took her into a room. She said, I discovered I believe I do have a resentment. I'm afraid to confess it. It isn't against any person. It almost seems like it's against God. It's against destiny. I get so resentful when all my friends among the women in this city go to their clubs and their Bible classes or everything, and I just have to sit like I was in prison going around my little daughter. I'm afraid to go to have a good time. I don't even dare go to a movie unless I take her. And I said, well, here's a place to cure two birds with one prayer. You let your little girl go to that Girl Scout camp this summer, and how long it'll be? It'll be 6 weeks. All right, start planning right now to go to the movies you want to go to some clubs, go to see art gallery, everything you've been wanting to do. I got a letter next fall that both were cured. I don't know of anything where it worked both. Now, those things don't always work as perfect as that unless the thing is completely done and run with faith. Football team came into my office and said, we're going to play a great team under the arc lights tonight. And the papers say we're going to lose 40-0. And I went over and turned on the light. Now, when you turn on the light, even in the daytime, when you push the switch, the lights go on. But I said to those men, if I had prayed all day for the lights to go on and left that break in the circuit, I'd have wasted my time. The same way with you. If there's a single one on this team that has a grudge against anyone on the team, he's shutting off the power. They have a way of telling whether you're crazy or not down at Mayo Hospital. They give you a pail to bail out a tub. If you bail all day without turning off the faucet, they know you're crazy. Now, if there's anyone pouring a faucet of hate, resentment, discard, I'd be just wasting time. And the captain spoke up and he said, we're like the three musketeers, one for all and all for one. And I said, all right, have a prayer. They took hands in a circle. I stepped in and prayed that the Lord would use them in any way he wanted to use them in that game and all through life. I didn't pray for victory or anything. They went off in silence. Each one stopped and took my hand gently. That night under the arc lights, the coach, who didn't believe this sort of stuff, said, boys, now put on your fighting faces. Put on your fighting faces, I say. Then he turned to his assistant and he said, no wonder we've lost all our games. Those boys don't have any more fight than a bunch of sheep. They're just as peaceful looking as a bunch of cows going out to eat grass. Those boys played as no team ever played in its history. My father went into a company that was failing. He didn't know anything about that business. He'd been asked to go in and see if he could save it. He didn't know insurance, but he knew men. He invited the agents from all over the state, said, we want to be one big happy family. They went out and they doubled their business within a year. He's made manager of agents of another company. They doubled their business within a year. He's made president of another company. They doubled their business within a year. Ralph Budd, a young man in the city, used to study father's methods, and when he became president of the Great Northern and found I was teaching in St. Paul, he'd have me come down to his office. He said, I'm following your father's method of building harmony. It's a secret power. We've got better harmony in our company than any company in America, and we're having greater success. He then became president of the Burlington. Half the railroad presidents of America, the Time magazine said, have been trained by Ralph Budd. The old little boy that used to play in my house is now president of the Great Northern. Now, president of Phillips University was out at our camp. He had such a long face that I couldn't stand any longer, and I asked him what the trouble was, and he said, my faculty meetings are like hell. I'm behind in paying the teachers. They're $7,000 in debt, and I just dread going back. 4 years later, I was in that city giving a series of addresses in commemorating the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Presbyterian Church. It so happened that it was the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Cherokee Strip also. And they invited me. They said that the president of Phillips University wants you to come out and address every morning his chapel. I found marvelous harmony. I wondered if he would, how he'd been so confused. He took me into his office and shut the door. You were surprised, weren't you? I said, I sure was. I came back from your camp. I sat down with my faculty for 2 hours. I told them about your football teams. I told them about your father's business. I said, let's take a promise in the Bible that Glenn Clark told me about, where 2 or 3 agree asking anything. In my name it will be done. Oh, that's a sweeping statement. But don't forget the condition. Agree. And the Greek comes from the same Greek stem our word symphony comes. Will you be willing to get us all in so in tune and harmony? We'll be just like an orchestra. They said they'd play the game. We paid off the debt. We have 4 new buildings. They're all paid for. I've been offered the presidency of the State University 4 times to double the pay and turned it down every time. Next year I'm to be president of the greatest men's service club in the world, the International Lions Club. And he spoke over the radio in Rome and Paris and London. And he often would end by saying, I got my religion at a little camp up in the woods of Minnesota. He's told the people all over the nation. And when he left, he said to his wife and daughter, what is it, present can I give you? Send us to a camp farthest out. That's all we want. Well, now I'm telling these things, all going back to Jesus, taking those, my goodness gracious. Why, just look at those parables. Those parables. Put a little leaven in the 3 measures of meal. There were 3 troublemakers in Roland Brown, Reverend Brown's church, and his wife said, why don't you use that parable that Glenn told about and just put some love in? If you have faith in leaven, she said, I put faith in yeast. When I put it bread in, I don't keep opening the oven door and looking in to see if it rises. I have faith in it. Now, if we put some love in those three measures of people, presently the whole church will be leavened. They put it in, it became leavened. There's one city that has the per capita of crime is greater than any city in America. It's named Benton Harbor. The businessmen got together and they asked Roland Brown if he'd leave his church and they come up there. They found he decided to go out in the evangelical field. Well, instead of going around the world, can't you come up here and spend 7 months and we'll pay you a salary and see if you can save this nation, this city. Well, the police captain came to him and overheard his listening to his talk, came up and said, I want to go all the way. Well, I don't know where to begin. Well, is anyone you hate? Yes, there is. Can you name him? He named a great politician in the city. Well, I guess that's where you better begin, isn't it? What do you think you ought to do? Well, I suppose I ought to love him and pray for him. And I don't know how. You will have to help me. So they went up in a hotel room and prayed until midnight. A friend, one of the church members said, there's a politician would like to take lunch with you. He took lunch with him and he said, I want to go all the way. I want to ask you one question. Is there anyone you hate? There certainly is. Well, you'll tell me who it is. And he named the police captain. Well, there'd be a good place to begin. What do you think you ought to do? I suppose I ought to love him and pray for him, and I don't know how. You'll have to help me. He prayed with him up until midnight. The next day, his friends called him up and said, Mr. Churchman told Roland Brown, you know, I saw that captain this morning, that politician. He said he'd be willing to meet that police captain. So he was with the police captain about midnight, and he said, the politician would like to meet with you. He said he'll meet with you tomorrow. Well, why tomorrow? Well, here's past midnight. That's past midnight. Well, that doesn't bother me any. I'm a policeman. In 20 minutes, they were both in that hotel room, sitting on the edges of their chairs like two little naughty schoolboys trying to make up. Finally, at his suggestion, they knelt down and they prayed. Today, the politician is mayor of the Benton Harbor. The police captain is the chief of police, and the crime rate is less than almost any city in America. Why, the leaven. You take the faith, you can put in leaven in bread, but the same faith in love, you can go back and change your church. Yes. There's a woman dying because she had an inner hemorrhage. And John Hopkins couldn't take her. Mayo's Hospital couldn't take her, and I'll tell you the reason why. They were too far away. Well, couldn't they raise some money and put her on a train? They didn't have any trains. An airplane, bus, no. An automobile? What do you mean? She was too far away, not in space, but in time. She was 2,000 years before Mayo Hospital had been founded. And so she looked at a man that was given an address on the mountain that had thrilled her, and she said to her friends, he talked about the love of God. How if you ask for bread, your son should ask for bread, you wouldn't give him a stone, and how much more your heavenly Father would. Now, I've noticed that man of Galilee wears a wonderful garment. I make my own garments, and I always hem them up carefully, but I never saw a garment that intrigued me so as that, so beautifully hemmed up. The woman who made that must have loved that garment, but she couldn't have loved it as much as God should have loved our bodies when he made our bodies. I know the thing that would give me faith, a stick I could take hold of, that would give me the conviction, if I could take hold of the hem of that garment and inwardly pray that God would hem my body up as beautifully, I just know he would do it. Well, why don't you do it? Why, if anyone saw me grab a man of God by the hem of the garment, they'd say, there's a woman of the street. They'd take me outside the city limits and stone me. I don't dare. But oh, how she longed for that opportunity, and when the crowd gathered, a most audacious, daring scheme came to her that's in the whole New Testament. She said, if I get behind that bunch of women there, he's coming along there, I could reach under their skirts and touch the hem of his garment, and no one would know it. And she succeeded, and no one knew it. But the man of Galilee, who can always tell, right up there in heaven, whenever you take hold of something, you can take hold of, like I took hold of, the faith that lights. Something happened to that team. You take hold of something like that, he'll always know it, and he'll always answer. And he said, somebody took hold of me, like Elisha took hold of that stick with faith. He came back. There she was, flushed, embarrassed, but thrilled. And he said, woman, your faith has made you whole. Folks think, so many people say, and that all the answers to prayer ended back here, when this book ended. Why? Did that what Jesus came here when he said, greater works than I have done ye shall do? Because I go to the Father, and I'm going to release all my power now in the form of the Holy Spirit that's available for you any time and every time. No. And so in the Kentucky camp some years ago, a woman came to me and said, I have a flow of blood. I thought permanent, and I wish you'd pray. I took her into the prayer room with Roberta Fletcher, who was the prayer hostess. And there's a picture of the Solomon's Christ, the presence, standing in a wonderful pose, and a beautiful garments, beautifully painted. I watched Solomon do some of his paintings. At Koinonia, where I just came from, there's a picture of almost the size of the side of the room that he painted before a Camps Farthest Out roof, and they framed it and have it hang there outside of Baltimore. I said, Solomon puts lots of love in his pictures. He put a lot of love in that painting of that garment, and it's beautifully hemmed up, but not as much love as God put into the making of your body. You kneel. I'm going to tell you about a woman of 2,000 years ago and what she did with faith. Now you kneel and touch the hem of that garment with your in the picture, and Roberta and I will pray. And she was instantly healed. 2 months later, in Coronas, a woman came to me and said, I've got to leave. I had just here the first day, and I just got a letter from my daughter. She's going to have an operation next week, and I'm going to get a plane ticket and fly out. Isn't that too bad? I said, what's the trouble? Why, she has an inner hemorrhage constantly. And here's the letter. It said, I just came from the doctor. He says, my blood count is getting so low, it's not safe to wait any longer. He's going to operate on me next week. And so I'm going to take the plane. And I said, just wait a minute, let's come into the chapel. There was one of Solomon's pictures where the sheep was all around the hem, and she had to stand on her tiptoes to touch the folds of the garment. I told her the woman of 2,000 years ago, the woman of 2,000 miles away, she touched that with faith, and we prayed for the daughter. And then I said, now I think your daughter's healed. And now I don't usually say these things. I'm not one of these that, but I don't know why, and it's because I had such a conviction. My faith is so clear because it just happened 2 months before. I'm going to suggest that you don't buy the ticket, but you send a letter by airmail to your daughter at once. Tell her to reply by return mail. Ask her just how she's feeling, just when the operation's to be, just when she wants you to be there. And in 4 days from now you'll get it, and you still can get there. She sent the letter. 4 days later, a reply came. I just came from the doctor. He took an x-ray. He examined me all over. He said, all my organs are perfectly sound now. I won't need an operation. It was a year after that. I was speaking at the Oregon camp out at Portland. I told the story of these answers, and a woman in the back seat with white hair got up and she didn't wait for me to finish the talk. She said, I am that mother that prayed with you at Cronus. That hemorrhage never came back. I just received a letter this morning from my daughter. Her third child has come. Ever since her second child has come, she had had this condition. Perfectly normal birth. Now, I'm not going to put up a sign and say anyone that has this particular trouble, come and touch a picture and all that. It depends upon the conditioning of your faith. I want to say I don't know that I could have that faith of about 11, because I baked a cake once when I was a boy, and I told my mother to keep my sisters out the kitchen, and I got out 6 cookbooks. And after a while I went up to the room where my mother was doing some sewing, and I said, can you tell me where I can get 6 more cups? Why, we've got 14 cups. What do you want more for? Well, it says you should have 10 cups of flour, 2 cups of baking powder, 3 cups of sugar, 2 cups of butter, and I just got some more. I need some more. And then I just shoved them in like that and didn't even stir them. And when that cake came out, it was as solid as any cement sidewalk was ever made. But now, he told these various parables that would fit different people. Now what shall we do? Don't get the impression this is going to make you rich. Some people think, oh, Glenn, some ministers never read my books. Never come to a camp. They'll beware of Glenn Clark. He said you can just treat God as a cosmic bellboy. Have him run and do your errands. If you meet the conditions, if you get a team together, a business together, and have them perfectly in harmony and love, oh my, I have to work, and I'm only rarely do I meet those conditions. And then have the faith like a grain of mustard seed. Well, don't think it's going to make you rich. When I was 40 years old, I didn't have any car, and all the neighbors did. I couldn't afford a car and on a college professor's salary, and I have 3 children, and tithe my income to the church, and make payments on a house, and I didn't want to go back to renting. I didn't want to resign my job. Didn't want to kill off my children. Didn't want to stop tithing. So we had a lot of cars. So on Sunday afternoons, we'd go out walking. My wife would push the baby carriage, a little 2 months old. I pulled a little wagon with a little 2-year-old. And our little 4-year-old in a white dress would trot along and inspect all the gutters in the alleys. And after about 8 blocks, we'd get home, sit on the porch and watch our neighbors go out in their Cadillacs and their Fords to pick flowers and have a lovely Sunday afternoon in the beautiful meadows and lakes of beautiful Minnesota. One day I looked at her, and she was looking across the neighbors who had a Cadillac, and I wondered if she's going to get a goiter if he didn't do something. So I said, Louise, while the children are little, we ought to have the cheapest kind of a car, just an open touring car. You figure it up and see if he couldn't afford it. She figured it up. Next day she told me, she reported if he had $100 more, we could safely make the payments. Otherwise, we'll be in debt for life. In that case, I said, we better push the baby carriage. And then something dawned on me that I could take hold of, like that stick. There's a need. If I could just toss it out there, I might see an automobile come swimming up. But I want an accident for it. I'd like to have an automobile come swimming up. I said this summer, our little 4-year-old dug a little well in the seashore sand and waited patiently for the tides to come in and fill it. She had to wait a long time, but she knew they'd come. Now let us take this need of $100 as we would a well in the seashore sand and have faith, like our little daughter had, in God's great abundance, tides. He could easily fill that if he wants us to have the car. That way we'll leave it up to him. We're really not asking him. We'll say, now if you want it, let's have it, you can send in the tides. 10 days later, a young man rang our bell one night and said, I represent a Ford agency. I understand you're thinking of getting a Ford touring car. Exactly what we were thinking of getting, but we hadn't told anyone but the Lord. That was the first time I discovered that Henry Ford must have had some little private pipeline with Jehovah. We told him the situation. He said, you'll have to decide by a week from Monday, or I can't guarantee a car of that make this year. A week from Monday, an envelope came. I opened it up, and out fell a check for $108. My wife picked up the check, and I read the letter. It told how I'd been a teacher at another college 12 years before, and as I tithed, out of the $1,000 salary, $1,000 a year, not a month, I'd given $100 toward this endowment fund, and it was now becoming a junior college, and was returning the last $100,000 to its donors. I've been connected with colleges all my professional life, and the biggest miracle ever happened to me was a college giving back some of its endowment fund. I said, now I'm going to use that lever, that handle, to bring a gymnasium to McAllister College. All the other colleges have fine gymnasiums. Their boys, track boys, run around the indoor tracks, and I, as for 20 years, a coach up here, had to have my boys go out and wade in the deep snow in winter to get them conditioned for spring. I'm going down and tell the trustees about this, and my wife said, oh, don't, Glenn, just because you were raised a Congregationalist and I was a Presbyterian, you still think the Presbyterians have more faith in prayer because we have longer faces. They're more serious about it. Well, you know, my father's raised a Methodist, my mother was raised a Presbyterian. When they married, they compromised and became Congregationalists. I was brought up a Congregationalist, my wife was brought up a Presbyterian, and when we married, we compromised and became Presbyterians. Now, she said the Presbyterian elders and the ministers, they were all that, on the trustees, will fire you. Well, I went to see an old lady. I said, told her about our praying for gymnasium. Don't you think it'd be all right if I go down and talk to the trustees? She said, you and your wife have been praying for it? I said, yes. But you won't have to see the trustees. I got a wonderful vision as you were talking. I could see the gymnasium come floating right in. It's going to come before anyone expects it. It's going to come this year. It's going to come from a student in your writing class. Well, that was getting too specific, and I hurried out. But I told my wife I decided to take her advice and not see the trustees. And I told her about this, and we laughed it aside. In the middle of the winter, a little sophomore girl working away entirely through college, little Lillian, came up and said, can I see you, Prof? And I said, I'm sorry, there's some important people I promised to meet. This hour, you see me some other time. And I turned my back and left a gymnasium standing there in the middle of the floor. Don't ever say that John P. Morgan is the man to do it. Henry Ford. My most wonderful things have always come through the most unexpected way, so I never limit God. Never limit him. Well, 2 days later, the class met again, and here's the little girl. She said, you know, we cheer the football boys, we give them sweaters, we give them a banquet at the end of the season in honor of them. But there's one group that we've never honored. They're the trustees that pay our bills. As I found that 6 of the 20 trustees have worked for the college for 20 years. I thought it'd be nice if the students, not the faculty, but just the students, would give a party for the trustees. That made me weak all over. I could see a gymnasium floating in. I went back and sat down. I didn't have any reason for thinking it. But I said, that isn't your idea. She said, what do you mean? I said, that's God's idea. Oh, she said, I know what you mean. Ordinary an idea comes and I can push it aside, but this one wrestles with me at night like Jacob's angel and won't let me go. And I felt I should see you and no one else. I haven't told anyone but you. That's another valuable thing in prayer. Don't talk too much. Don't let all the air out the balloon. It may not be a balloon. It may go to great heights if you take care of it. I said, let's sit right down here now and pick out the 5 most representative students, have them present that at the next convocation to the student body, and if they adopt it, then let's you and me appoint another committee on arrangement. She said, oh no. If it goes through, have those students appoint the committee. Don't tell the students here that I had anything to do with it. Then I knew the gymnasium was coming because the most powerful leverage of all to be called up is when you raise yourself out of the picture. It lets Jesus in. The party was given. The next day, the next week, the trustees sat around a table. One of them said, that was a wonderful family. They're just like our own children. Yes, said another, we ought to do something for them. Well, what do they need? Well, they need a gymnasium. Well, depression or no depression, let's give them a gymnasium. And they laid down $200,000, and the finest gymnasium. If any college in the Middle West went up, we had an open winter, something unheard of up there. They could put a spade in the ground in February. They had to call off the ice carnivals. And Jimmy Dixon, my star long-distance runner, running around that indoor track, fell in love with Lillian, and when they graduated, they married. And when I wrote the sequel to In His Steps, what did Jesus do? Using the grandchildren of the characters in Charles M. Sheldon's famous book. The governor of Kansas, Governor Carlson, now he's senator, and the mayor of Topeka, and all the ministers of Topeka invited me down there to Topeka and talk with them about when this book should come out. I said, it'll come out the 15th of November, 6 months away. They said, well, we'll turn over to you the city municipal auditorium that holds 5,000 people. We'll invite bishops and Daniel Poling and others, Edgar Guest, to be the speakers. And you and Starr Daily and Roland Brown, Rebecca Beard can have meetings in the churches all day long. We'll just have a week, a real premiere of that. And when the premiere came, and the night came for Daniel Poling to come, he rode all the way from Formosa, where he had been sent by the government to do some inspecting. He loved Charles M. Sheldon. He liked me, but he said, I got to tell you about the greatest missionary in the world. Her name is Lillian Dixon. Her husband, my old far distance runner, is president of the Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Formosa. They have gone up among the headhunters, and the greatest movement in modern missions is on. Those headhunters, where it wasn't safe, are being taken by storm. They're building churches so fast, they built 160 churches in the last 3 years with their own hands. The Dixons and others with their training are meeting there. And when we came to Japan, she found that was true. And when we were in India, Stanley Jones came to our Camp Farthest Out, and he said, when you go to Formosa, I want you to meet a wonderful missionary. I forget her name. The first name's Lillian, and Roland, and I said, their last name's Dixon. Oh, yes, he said. Roland Brown said that she's a missionary that Glenn Clark made. Well, he said, she's wonderful. When they were driven out by the Japanese in the Second World War, I was driving Lillian across from Minneapolis to St. Paul to give an address in the church, and she said, do you remember, Prof, the first spadeful of dirt dug up for that gymnasium you put in a little bottle and you gave to me? And I said, I'd forgotten that, but no, you remind me of it. And she said, that's been with me at Formosa, Japan, British Guinea. It's with me now. I said, you keep, that's a symbol of the leverage of modesty and humility, which you just made yourself a path to let Christ come in. Yes, she took it. We heard that she and James Dixon were on a furlough and wouldn't be in Formosa when we got there, and that made my heart sink because they'd wanted me many years. The Lord always looks after things, and he brought her back the week before to look after her lepers. She got the money to build. There's 2,000 lepers out there. She had us come out and address those lepers. They look just as fine looking as you did. They're there in the center of the church where the soldiers, hundreds of them, Chiang-Kai-shek soldiers, they contracted leprosy, but they'll just remain there till they die. They had a little choir that stood and sang. There's a mixed choir over here. I addressed them the Sunday morning. Roland Brown addressed them Sunday night, and she's been the little angel. She just has been the one that just prevents their suicides. There have been suicides every day. She's making them happy. She's teaching them these things. They're anxious to hear me because they've been reading my books. Well, she arranged these meetings. Roland and I addressed the seminary that her husband's president of. He addressed the Baptist seminary. We met the young people. And then Everlasting Life took us up to the, he's their chief helper, a young Formosan who stood at the head of the class in her husband's seminary, and a most marvelous, saintly chap. His mother named him Everlasting Life. Everlasting Life took us up to the mountain, and there we could just see the radiant faces. You could tell the Christians from the others. Their face radiated. They used those headhunters in the past, couldn't come into polite society. They brought home a head. Now they can't join a church until they save a soul. The result is it's spreading like wildfire. They don't drink or smoke. They have a higher requirements than we have. Well, there it is. Little Lillian. She took hold of a leverage. And so then we use this leverage for McAllister College, which is the poorest college, and it's become the richest. I won't tell you about that. Make you think that money does come when you use these levers. But I do want to say this. You take those parables of Jesus, and you'll find that they put into life that technique that Elisha used in the first Camp Farthest Out. So in our camps, in our prayer groups we're going to now, my prayer group I know of, you may want to bring up and say, now here's a woman that has rheumatism. What lever should we use there? My husband's failing in business, what failed there? Has ulcers, what's the matter there? A sense of inadequacy to meet the conditions is the cause of ulcers. And I'll tell you all the list. You can get to find in this, how to find help through prayer, some of that listed. But the point is, you can go just take Jesus' parables and take the faith he tells us to have, and it's simply marvelous. Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for this privilege of coming here, and a place removed from the world far enough for us to be out here like we were down at the Jordan. You'll never forget us how we stood there by the banks of the Jordan and thought of all these events that have happened there. And now, Father, right here by the great river of life that's flowing through us, through the world, we want to build a Camp Farthest Out. We want to build a school of the prophets. Use us in this coming week that our problems may be solved. We've lost the divine spark of inspiration from the mechanical phase of our life. Help us to make it rise to the surface so we can put it back. And instead of going around with just the mechanics and mere outer forms of happy life, that down deep inside we can be radiating the love and joy of one who's found his master. So, Father, put your blessing upon all of us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.